All right, thanks for joining us today, guys. Welcome. We are here to present to you our plan to bring BC Game Days to zero waste. We are the City Council of Boston College.
Hi, my name is Faith Drescher. I'm a sophomore in the Lynch School of Education.
I'm Fran Hodgins. I'm a junior in the Carroll School of Management.
And I'm Charlie Neal. I'm a sophomore engineering major at MCAS.
So just a roadmap of where we're going to head today. We're going to lead with a high-level overview of the recommendation, followed by a little bit of background, what informed our recommendation. Then we'll jump into some stakeholder analysis, and we sort of looked at each stakeholder and their goals. We'll do a deeper review of the plan outline, followed by a quick analysis of some risks, and then we'll wrap it up with a summary.
So our plan is divided into two categories. Our first category is operations, which is going to focus on the more feasible economic side of things, short-term solutions. And then we're going to shift over into culture. How can we change BC behavior in the long term, focusing on psychology and graph theory?
So we chose to focus on kind of the three biggest events, sports events on campus. So football in Alumni Stadium, and then hockey and basketball in Conti Forum. And we talked to Matt Hayes in athletic maintenance. He told us that a typical football game, such as the one you see a picture of here, produces about 2 dumpsters of landfill material and 2 dumpsters of single-stream recycling material. So what we found was really interesting and impactful about this, in addition to what you see here, is that the really fun tailgating experience is very contrasted to what happens with the waste during that's produced there. So in Massachusetts, about a third of the waste in the state is incinerated in incinerators such as these. And there's a very big issue of racial injustice about where that waste is incinerated. So you see these blue stars are where incinerators are located, and the orange dots are active landfills, and they overlap with low-income communities and communities of color. So we would like to transition to zero waste at our game days. There's a couple different definitions of what that means, but they have kind of an overall theme of we want to reduce waste and also not throw out materials that have potential value. There's a lot of schools that have been doing this for a long time. Ohio State has been doing zero waste game days for 10 years. UVA has done them. And we also wanted to say that it's very much part of BC's mission, as you see at the bottom right corner. Climate change is definitely one of the world's most urgent problems.
So when brainstorming for our proposal, we divided our stakeholders into 4 different categories directly aligned with our goals. First, we have our fans. We want to make sure that fans are still enjoying game days with no additional burden or costs on our sustainability efforts. Then we have game day operations. We want to make sure that we're managing our finite human capital. Then we're looking at BC administration, maintaining that positive BC image amongst students, alumni, and donors. And finally, the environment. We want to make sure that it's flourishing. So we're going to start with operations. Our first is adapting a purchasing strategy with aluminum.
So if you go into Conti or Alumni right now and buy a soda, it comes in a plastic bottle. That's actually relatively recently. Up until 2020, soft drinks were sold from a soda fountain with a paper cup. That's because Alumni is not weatherized, so as the weather gets colder, pipes break, which is less than ideal during a really packed football game. So we talked to Frank Bailey, who was the head of concessions, and he told us that working with Coke, they decided moving to plastic was just more realistic. So that's what happens right now. So our proposal is to switch from plastic to aluminum. Aluminum is very highly recyclable, and especially in New England. New England has a lot of facilities for recycling aluminum, as opposed to glass, which actually has to get shipped out of the region, which is important to note. And then eventually we'd like to switch back to fountain beverages, but as kind of a shorter-term solution, we think aluminum is really the way to go. And we can also use compostable packaging, so paper and these cardboard compostable packages for hot dogs and popcorn and things like that.
So jumping into the next section of operations, looking at updating the waste receptacles to match these new items. For a little bit of background, nothing is allowed inside Alumni Stadium on game days, so everything that's disposed of in Alumni Stadium, in theory, is sold in Alumni Stadium. So in order to match these new streams of recycling, if we're just looking at aluminum, we're just looking at compost, we propose that we would update the waste receptacles in alignment with that. Currently, Matt Hayes, who's head of athletic maintenance and facilities, told us that they actually have staff hand sorting the recycling into single stream recycling and into landfill materials after game days. And that's great, although only about 5 to 6% of plastic waste in the US is ultimately recycled. So the single stream recycling option is kind of a major part in the not truly recyclable nature of BC game days.
Our proposal is to introduce new waste receptacles using more human-centered designs, shapes, and colors. We're going to divide it into compost, aluminum, and liquid and landfill bins. As you can see kind of on the right, where images of exact BC products are going to be at eye level. They're also going to be conveniently located around the stadium. And we're assuming that fans are going to have a little bit of a hard time doing this at first. And so we're going to introduce waste goalies, which are going to directly help fans sort and organize their trash with our partnership with Boston Green Academy. So last week I went down to Boston Green Academy, commuted on the T, and talked to Dr. Dave Kramer. Boston Green Academy is a K-12 school that's already currently partnered with BC through Pulse, and they have the only career and technical education program directly related to environmental science, which means that they already have waste goalies in their lunch program that sign up to help their peers organize their trash. Dave Kramer mentioned that we're going to need some incentives for students to come to BC, which is going to include giving them service hours. They need 40 hours to require to graduate across 4 years, and then also some fundraising money for their sustainable field trips. This directly ties to our theme of racial justice because BGA has a very diverse population of students, and so this would allow them into more green careers, and also introducing students to a college campus is always impactful in the long run. They also recently hired a new staff member for outside organizations to be that liaison between BC and their school.
Jumping into the last section of this operations side of things, section 1C, we want to promote responsible waste disposal during fan tailgates. I mean, right now, the status quo is fans have a lot of disposable cups, plates, etc. By the end of game days, you kind of just throw it on the ground so you know that someone's going to pick it up. Maybe talk to people who said that the goal is to make it look like it never even happened a couple hours after game day. So we have many people working game day ops and facilities to make sure that that ends up being the case. But our goal is not just promote responsible waste disposal, because that's not a very concrete recommendation. We recommend hiring zero waste interns, using facilities and Office of Sustainability to hire actual BC students to get paid to sort of advise people like you see here on like responsible waste practices, and even maybe pass out landfill and recycling bags to tailgaters on game days.
So moving into the more culture aspect of our recommendations, another problem we have on campus is that there's a lot of student groups that are very excited about working with the environment. The problem is that there's not very much communication between those groups and the administration, and the communication that there is often not framed in the best way. So the example you see on the right here is when a BC student group got in trouble for interacting with the administration in a way that just is not productive. So we talked to Matt Brin, who works at the Princeton Office of Sustainability, and they have a position that is kind of a student administration liaison, and they help students work through their projects in ways that will be successful and work with the administration instead of against them. So we propose hiring this staff member for the Office of Sustainability, and they can also help work with facilities and other groups to make these proposals that we're suggesting actually work out.
Now we're looking at how can we change BC culture in the long term. So we've decided to adapt a behaviorist model of learning. Using psychology, this means that learning is seen through tangible actions. We're going to divide it into two categories, classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Looking at classical conditioning, we notice that BC game days are directly associated with carelessness with waste. This includes stimuli such as alcohol, lack of education, lack of convenience, and unsustainable materials, which leads to being careless with waste and then associating BC game days with that. So we need to counter condition fans and other groups at BC to have BC game days associated with responsibleness, which includes our education initiative with BGA, convenience, including our zero waste interns, and then sustainable materials with our aluminum proposal, so that BC game days are then automatically associated with responsibleness with waste. We're then going to turn to operant conditioning, which means that we're giving people rewards to have an increase in behavior. We're going to have 3 different proposals. Our first is our Get Caught Recycling program. This is going to have our BGA waste goalie selecting a few random students throughout the game to see if they're practicing our sustainable initiatives that we want to see happening, give them a few free incentives such as t-shirts or food vouchers, and then put them on the video stream because, as when we interviewed Jamie DiLoretto, I hear all the time, food and t-shirts for students.
So the second one of our suggestions is having a sustainable tailgater of the game reward. So similar to inside the stadium, we have waste goalies selecting students. Outside the stadium, you'd have zero waste interns selecting a tailgating group or a tailgater who's practicing good waste practices, and they would receive an upgraded tailgate spot for the next game, which is a really big reward. And in addition, we would want to implement this kind of cup of the game idea. So when people buy a tailgating spot, they rolled into that would be these aluminum souvenir cups, which in addition to being very highly recyclable, are also just pretty fun. They're something that I would love to use on a game day and that I might want to take home afterwards. And if fans bring those into the stadium, then they'd get 1 free fountain drink, which further encourages them to use use the cups. So all these three ideas make use of data supported by math, by graph theory, which says that when you have very interconnected groups impacting just a few people, like actually spreads incredibly quickly through the group because it's so interconnected. And oftentimes it's so much faster than you'd expect. So putting a few students on the video board is really quickly going to influence the rest of the community.
Then jumping into the financial impact of this plan, because we didn't want to have any impact on the fan experience, didn't want to increase costs for them, the BC Game Day operations and BC Athletics would end up bearing the cost of this initiative because there's no meaningful revenue impact. While there's some cost increases, there are also some cost declines. As we mentioned, we really would look forward to getting back to those fountain drinks that we had in years past. And as we talked to Frank Bailey, who's involved in concessions, those fountain drinks are 70 to 80% cheaper than bottled beverages on like a per unit basis, which would mean that over time, transitioning back to fountain beverages would actually contribute to declines in cost. In order to develop a budget though for this, I decided to take a look at just the operating expenses, so excluding the capital expenditures of Weatherizing Alumni, which would probably take place as part of a larger initiative, maybe with some other update of Alumni Stadium. Also, new waste receptacles, it's just kind of difficult to put that into an operating budget. And also excluded the prizes for Get Caught Recycling because they're just so small that it wouldn't really make sense to include as part of an operating budget like this one. So you might notice that aluminum cans are a pretty massive increase on a per season basis, $30,000. That's based on a pretty high estimate of 75% of fans purchasing drink during game days. And also remember that this is kind of a band-aid solution towards zero waste. The ultimate goal is to move away from these single-use like plastic aluminum cans and then moving toward these fountain drinks, which would generally be in compostable cups, and then that cost would pretty much it'll disappear after a few years. Also note the price premium from new waste. It's just about like $600 more. That was based on a lot of math that you actually can't see here. Even though the zero waste game days would produce a lot less waste overall, the streams of waste are a bit different. So it would be just aluminum versus single stream recycling. It would be just it would be compost and a little bit of landfill. Those things are all a little bit more expensive in the Boston area than single stream recycling and traditional landfill. So that is why it results in a slight increase overall.
So we wanted to put all of our ideas onto this timeline for you to see kind of all in one place. You can see going down the left here, we have each of our strategies, so adapting the purchase strategies with packaging and weatherizing, updating our waste bins, promoting tailgate recycling, and then our three ideas for evolving tailgating culture at the bottom. So for example, if you follow Zero Waste Intern Program, you'll be planned by our new faculty member in year 1, implemented for the first time in year 2, and then in year 3 there'd be time for people to make changes and see what worked, what didn't, what do we need to change over time. And that was what came out of a lot of our conversation with Matt Bryn from Princeton. He said that if you implement something, you need a couple years of trial run and changing things for it to really be successful. Another thing I think is really important to note out is that we have kind of these three ideas here at the bottom kind of coming later. And the reason for that is for time for things to kind of evolve and also make things really build on each other. So we're not kind of doing everything at once. We're letting things build on each other to create really a culture that can continue into the future.
And so this phased approach was based on a risk analysis we did, because any plan you make and you don't assess the risks and sort of react to that, it's bound to fail. We decided to evaluate based on capital needs and impact certainty. The beginning of our timeline are things that maybe have less capital need, but are sort of in the mid-range of impact certainty. Then as you get later on, the impact certainty is a bit more wide-ranging and the capital needs are higher. So this sort of makes sense so that we don't introduce everything at once and have everything kind of fail. It's sort of a phased approach based on our risk mitigation plan.
So our proposal to have zero waste game days includes operations, our purchasing strategy with aluminum. Then we're going to update our waste receptacles with our partnership with BGA, and finally promoting that tailgating recycling culture with our zero waste interns at BC. And finally, to have a new sustainable culture at BC, we're going to have a new liaison between students and administration with that new staff member, and evolving waste culture with behaviorism practices. We also have enduring benefits that are going to extrapolate into the long term, aligned directly with our stakeholders, alignment with the university mission for addressing our stakeholder of administration, racial justice, addressing our stakeholder of the environment and outside communities, enduring sustainability for our stakeholder fans, and finally, feasible new practices for game day operations.
Thank you.
Okay, great job. So we have time for a couple questions, and then yeah.
All right.
So aluminum, are you really just talking about the cups, or were you considering on the soda, the aluminum cans.
Yeah, so we would like to switch to aluminum cans in the stadium, just because we can do that pretty rapidly. Frank
So
Bailey
then you
said
wouldn't
that.
need the cup.
Well, the cups would be for outside the stadium. That's
Okay.
kind of in the mod line with tailgating.
Yeah.
And then inside the stadium, which is kind of more of a closed loop, then you'd use the cans. So they're kind of operating in different areas.
To follow up on that, have you found any stadiums that have been able to get aluminum cans? Because I know there is a shortage. for-
Right, no, that is a difficulty. That's something we came across in our conversations with Frank Bailey. So that just kind of goes into, we have a really positive relationship with our supplier Coke at the moment. So we would think that we could maybe leverage that really positive relationship we have with Coke and see if we can maybe put a little bit more pressure on them to introduce these more sustainable things as they're kind of going toward their ESG goals. They even introduced an aluminum Dasani bottle for these type of applications. So I mean, they're thinking about it, we're thinking about it. Maybe in a year or two, we could sort of cash in on that partnership.
Thank you.
So I'm very interested in kind of the research and analysis that went back, and I really appreciate the linked appendix that you have. Can you talk a little bit about kind of your sources? I mean, I see you did a number of interviews, and you also have a number of sources. Can you just talk a little bit about kind of the process of the research that you did and how it came to be?
So we wanted to make sure that we were talking to people that were actually working at BC, doing game days. So for example, we talked to Jamie DiLoretto, who's here right now, and we talked to other people in facilities, all different areas at BC to make sure that we were getting like actual BC information of what they want to see, what's the biggest challenges, making sure that we're addressing their needs as well. And then we also wanted to go outside to have that partnership with BGA. Dave Kramer seemed really excited. He thought it was a very legitimate thing that I was doing, setting up a partnership with him, which was lovely. So I hope that we can actually implement that in the future. And then also talking to the Princeton representative because we felt like their model was a good one that could be very similar and extrapolated to BC. And then we also were looking at other schools that are gone zero waste, such as the 12-pack schools, such that you saw on the slide previously, with the Ohio State doing it for over a decade and has a way bigger stadium than BC. And then also looking at unique things about BC and going online and seeing the different ways and then using that outline that we were given for the different behaviorism techniques that we ended up implementing to be directly related to BC. So that's kind of how we framed it.
Yeah. In addition, we also all come from different schools at BC. So we have Charlie in engineering, MCAS, then we have Faith Lynch, education, me, CSUL, business. And so we're able to leverage sort of each of our like siloed knowledge and come together to develop a recommendation that sort of spanned across that. So you see Charlie knowing about like New England waste and aluminum, and then Faith knowing about sort of these behaviorist, like psychological things, and me more on the financial side, what's practical, realistic. And so we were able to kind of bring that together and issue a recommendation that took into consideration all those different pieces of the experience.
Thank you.
So I really appreciate that research and like the connection on like behavior and thinking kind of holistically about how do you change not just the materials but the way people interact with them. I guess some of my questions are, you mentioned that you want to move towards fountain drinks again, something that had been done in the past, and then using compostable containers for that. Why not just jump right there? Why wait? Because that seems like a cheaper option. Also a change in behavior both in serving as well as, you know, how you're receiving that drink. And then I guess the other piece was, I love this cup, it's really cool. You're envisioning tailgaters using this as opposed to like the red plastic classic tailgate cup. That's a huge behavior change, you know, and huge cost. So how do you get those in the hands of a lot of tailgaters out there and then get it properly recycled?
So I can address the first part with how you wanted. Sorry, can you repeat the first part?
So why not just jump right to
Oh, yeah,
compostable
okay.
cups inside the stadium with fountain drinks?
Yeah, so we kind of wanted to put things in a more realistic timeline because it's really tempting to do everything at the same time, but I just think it's not really realistic with how the stadium works. And also when we talked to Frank Bailey, he said they used to have they used to have 2 Coke representatives who would move around the stadium during games and fix things as they broke. And the Coke just doesn't do that now. After COVID, they don't have the manpower. So we think that switching to back to fountain drinks later could come as part of another project where we need to renovate alumni for some other reason, and you kind of tack this on. instead of doing a whole big operation just to weatherize parts of alumni. So the aluminum cans is kind of more of a short-term thing, because we can do it right now. It's relatively simple compared to a big overhaul of alumni. So.
As you can see here, that's just like the pipes exposed, that's on the Beacon Street side. Then on the Ave side, like the Conti Forum side, none of those pipes are exposed. So as you can see, it would be kind of a major overhaul to make this side weatherize and allow the pipes to not freeze. So that's why it's a little bit further down the road. But if BC wanted to prioritize that, they certainly could do that.
And then in terms for the second part of your question, looking at the cups, as Charlie mentioned, our timeline is going to have more of a long term because that is such a big culture shift. So you need to give people a time to adjust and have new techniques and improving it over time. So that kind of goes to our interview with the Princeton representative, where he said you need to start implementing something and then gather data on it for at least 2 years before it's fully implemented. Tailgaters are going to get the cups because it's rolled into their tailgating spot, is kind of what we said in our proposal. So you're already getting the cups at your tailgate, and then we're not having students purchase them. The tailgaters are going to be purchasing them, rolled into their costs, and then the incentive is to bring your cup into the game so that you're getting a free drink once you're in there. And then over time, that will slowly result in a behavior change.
And also, they're just pretty fun. I was making these in the makerspace the other day, and I got a couple questions. Like, oh, what is that?
Did you
Like,
ever sell some?
But I mean, you have like I know there's fun artsy posters for game days. You do kind of a similar thing on cups, and that's something that I would totally use. And I've talked to a few friends, and they said they would definitely use it. So I think if you add just a little bit of fun to it, then people will want to instead of being a pain.
Awesome. Thank you so much.